Hi, this is Helen from DMA, and this is the module on supportive services that would be a part of your move on strategy in the Eastern PA CoC. We've talked about quite a few of these strategies or quite a few of these services throughout other modules, so this kind of ties all of that together and then provides a bit more detail. With that, we're going to dive right into transition supports. Okay, so just kind of a disclaimer of sorts that we are talking about transition supports here, but this will look differently if the individual is transitioning in place. It may still be relevant though, depending on how rent, utilities, etc. are structured. So it'll just take some common sense to try and figure out, how this plan or these supports might need to be adapted to transition in place. And we just kind of wanted to put that out there because that is still very much an option. So way back in the general overview module, we talked about, different moving on stages. And here with transition supports, we're talking about connections to community-based services. So, kind of veering away from the PSH specific services. We're talking about tenancy education, connections to utilities and other utility services, support around finances, and then hopefully potentially peer support if that's available in your area. So possible resources to connect individuals to, it will vary depending on your area, but perhaps self-help groups, community development or advocacy groups, volunteer opportunities, religious or spiritual communities, veterans groups, social clubs, family. This will be, especially important that there's some kind of connection to the community if the person is not transitioning in place, if they are going to a new area. If they are staying in place, then this might be less necessary because these natural supports are already available to them and perhaps are already integrated, into their daily living. That said, there might be a need even in transitioning in place to talk about some of these things because now the individual will be relying less on the PSH provider and more on some more natural supports. In terms of tenancy education, providers can help program participants understand the rights and responsibilities of the tenant and the landlord, what to do in situations such as when repairs are needed or they need to get in touch with the landlord, and the tenant's responsibilities related to maintaining their housing subsidy, whether it's a voucher, public housing unit, or another subsidy. And all of these are actually covered in PREP, the Prepare Renter Education Program, which is a curriculum offered by the Self-Determination Housing of Pennsylvania, or SDHP, and each person that is going through Move On will be required to be offered PREP. Okay, so this is, and I have more information on this later on, but this is something where the staff, whoever the transition supports are, they would have taken PREP. It's a train the trainer. So they would have taken it from SDHP and then in turn would be able to do the curriculum with those that are moving on. Okay, when we're talking about connection to utilities and services, ensure that the utilities, if they're not included in the rent, are in the individual's name and that they're going to be turned on. Is there a utility deposit? If so, can the program participant pay it? If not, is there a resource that might be able to help? Are there other supports such as the LIHEAP that might be available? And then any other connections like to the phone, internet, things of that nature. Support around finances is something else that's also covered in PREP, actually, as is talking through the utilities and things on the last slide as well. And this will look differently, again, if it's transitioning in place. And a lot of this probably already occurred while the person was, like, quote unquote, in permanent supportive housing, leading up to what has made them a prime candidate for moving on. But if not, we want to make sure that all of these are kind of addressed while the person or before the person transitions out. So, ensuring that their budget is reasonable and sustainable. Sustainable is really the key, because it might not be possible that someone has like affordable housing where housing is 30% of their income. So the budget, it might be unreasonable in that way, but is it sustainable? Start or continue to work around building, repairing credit and addressing problematic debts. That's something that is probably going to come out in one of the earlier assessments. If more information on assessing, watch that particular module. But probably earlier on, when you offer that, you'll see, and through case management, that credit repair, might be beneficial to this person. So hopefully that's something that would have already been at least in the beginning stages of being worked on, if not, well on its way. You're going to help program participants plan for changes that might occur, especially if there's like different diagnoses that are involved with this participant, and surprises they might not do well with that. It might trigger anxiety. You want to really make sure that they are as prepared as possible. If necessary, connect program participants to benefits counselors, specialists who could help answer questions about future situations, such as getting a part-time job, how that might impact benefits. So perhaps the local, workforce development or career force, whatever the case may be, whatever resources you have in your county, perhaps the local county assistance office, making sure that they know who to contact, because chances are, if they have any kind of public benefit through the county assistance office, there is a caseworker there. So, make sure that they have that contact information. And then identify community resources and organizations the participant can turn to in the future. Okay, if the person is moving, identify what furniture program participants need in their new home. When possible, make funding available for program participants to purchase furniture. Sometimes the Salvation Army or other nonprofits in a community, sometimes churches, have a voucher program where individuals can go and get like $200 worth of furniture. If there's not a program like that in your community, perhaps thinking about partnering with a local nonprofit and making something like that available, if not to the whole community, just to folks that are maybe moving on. Along those lines, work with those reputable local nonprofit organizations that can donate new or high quality, professionally cleaned or gently used furniture. And if the program participant is moving from site-based to a site-based supportive housing unit, providers should be really clear with the program participant about what items of furniture, if any, they can take. So manage those expectations ahead of time, as opposed to like on the moving day. All right, help program participants develop a plan for moving day. If you can, pay for and arrange to hire a moving truck. In a situation where the program participant or staff are able and willing to move the items themselves. That may not always be possible depending on whoever is operating the program. But if it's not, see if you can pay and arrange for movers to transport furniture and other items. That might also be something that can be leveraged. There might be some people affiliated with a local church who might be willing to do that. Or I gave this example, I believe, in the general overview module. But back in the county where I was doing housing, we actually had a relationship with the county jail, and they had a work release program, and those folks were able to come supervised and help move our individuals at no cost. Help program participants get everything set up in their new home. And if there's any new or used furniture that's going to be arriving, have it get sent directly to the new home. So it's not, sent to an office and then has to be transported again, to the extent that all of that is possible. Talking about available resources again, and really spelling it out for the individuals so that they know which offices they need and exactly where they're located and who their contacts are. So human service office locations. I can't even tell you how many times in my old county, for example, where I worked, we had the county housing office, but there was also the public housing authority or the housing authority. Well, both of them, among people that were using our services and supports, called both of them housing. So it became very tricky sometimes figuring out, well, what office did someone go to? Who did they want to talk to? Who did they mean to talk to? All of those things. So really saying, okay, this is the office for this. This is the office for this. Any healthcare facilities that they are going to be responsible getting to or setting up transportation to get to. Public transportation, or perhaps there's ride sharing through the aging office, perhaps. Grocery stores and pharmacies, schools, daycare centers, after school programs, all of those things, parks, community recreation sites. Just want to make sure, especially if they're new to the area, that they really have a good understanding of what is where. If you have the ability to drive them around, maybe do a neighborhood tour and let them see exactly, what is where. That could be really helpful as well. Now, if transitioning in place, make it clear what will be different and what will stay the same. You need to discuss with the participant changes to the lease, changes in who to contact in different issues. Okay, it won't be the staff anymore at the PSH program. It will likely be a property manager or the landlord themselves, and how to contact those individuals if there's an issue. We know as professionals that paper trails are really, really helpful. And the prep curriculum, which I've now mentioned a few times, does a really good job of outlining how to have those conversations with landlords in writing, and even a sample letter of like how to document something that might be broken. Just telling something to a landlord in passing really isn't going to cut it. It might get the job done, but it certainly isn't going to help if they ever need to go to court and try and get some kind of resolution over an issue. You definitely want to show them the best way to communicate with their tenant, with their landlord. And kind of talk about how their responsibilities will differ once they're no longer in PSH. So that was like the services that should be offered, like in a nutshell, as someone is transitioning into their own move-on unit or transitioning in place, and then for the several months beyond, which you'll know from other modules can be covered. Those supportive services can be covered by CoC PSH funded programs for up to 6 months after someone's rental assistance ends. So that's what has to be done and what to account for. But now for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to look at how to potentially offer those. Like there's certain techniques and strategies to incorporate while you're doing this service delivery. And so that's what we're going to look at for the next couple of slides. First off is the staffing. So in most cases, it's going to make sense for the program participant's current case manager to continue to be the primary point of contact. That may not always be the case though. So you're going to have to decide what works for your organization, and not only for your organization, but really what works best for the participant. So case managers, however, can't do this work alone. Staffing structures for moving on, they're going to vary wildly, depending on the size and staffing patterns of the provider organization or organizations doing this in your county or service region, and the scale of the initiative, availability of resources, etc. So if you want, or rather to get more details on different staffing models, go look at this presentation, Creating a Culture Supportive of Moving On. That will be a good resource for you. Something else that you're going to want to incorporate into this service delivery, especially I would say in like the assessment phase of things and pre-assessment, and really having, when someone is trying to figure out if they should be moving or not, is this whole idea of motivational interviewing, or MI. Your CoC has provided training on this in the past, so there should be resources on the CoC website. It's also something that organizations, training organizations tend to train on through their rotation of topics, so be on the lookout for this. And MI is a method that works on facilitating and engaging intrinsic motivation within the client in order to change behavior. Okay, it is goal-oriented, it is strengths-based, and client-centered counseling for eliciting behavior change by helping clients to explore and resolve ambivalence. So it's a lot of looking at the pros and cons of something, having them think through things on their own and coming to their own conclusions, making their own goals. MI principles and an understanding of the stages of change can be useful and relevant in the context of moving on, both in helping PSH program participants explore possible interest in moving on, as just mentioned, as well as managing fears or hesitation that can come up during the process. So this is definitely something, if it's not in your toolkit, you're going to want to put it in your toolkit. And if it is, you might want to brush up on this sort of thing before you go full on into implementing a move on strategy. Critical time intervention, or CTI, this is another one of those things you want to be aware of and have in your toolbox. It's something else that has been widely trained on in recent years, so there are plenty of resources out there, as well as on the CoC website, I believe. It's a time-limited approach that uses a brokered case management that emphasizes intentional connections and coordination with mainstream community providers as services taper down. In this, it's over a 9-month period. CTI has been used as a services model for transition and aftercare supports and some moving on programs. So this is a very prescriptive 9-month program. There might be some other version of this that works for you and your organization and the funding. Nonprofit service providers interested in building staff capacity to offer moving on services informed by the stages of change model, CTI and MI, you can access moving on from supportive housing, or MOSH, and that's developed by the School of Social Work at Rutgers and the State University of New Jersey. And this is really a very full curriculum. Once you go to this hyperlink, you would go, you get an individual use license from at no cost. From there, you can download all of the materials, and it truly is a full curriculum that goes into a very deep dive of how to really be very client-centered and intentional when doing these types of transition supports. DMA will offer MOSH-related support to communities who show commitment to implementing a move-on strategy. So we don't have that training to offer you right now, but if this is something that you really want to look into, in addition to having the link, it's something that DMA can potentially walk through with you as well, depending on your needs and wants. All right, another kind of aspect of case management to keep in your toolbox, which I'm sure you've heard about, is trauma in care, or TIC. We talked a bit about this in the assessment module and how to incorporate trauma-informed care into the assessment process. So this talks about adoption of principles and practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. There's a whole lot to this, but essentially there are 6 key principles to a trauma-informed approach according to SAMHSA. And that would be incorporating safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historic, and gender issues, and taking all of that into an account when working with someone. Okay, along the lines of trauma and trauma-informed care, we want to look at racial trauma and cultural humility. We try not to say cultural competency in the CoC too very often because that requires a very high level of competency. It's really, and it may actually be just like unfeasible for people to be truly competent in a culture that's not their own. So we tend to veer more on the side of being a cultural humility. And so racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress is the cumulative effect of racism on an individual's mental and physical health, and it's something to be aware of when implementing Move On. Cultural humility is the ability to interact effectively with people of different cultures. In practice, both individuals and organizations can be culturally competent. Culture must be considered at every step of the engagement with clients. One of the best ways to do this is to incorporate those with lived experience and lived expertise into the fabric of the decision-making and planning-making bodies of the Move On strategy. So having the people planning the process be representative and looking like and acting like those who typically would be the end user of the process. And that's a good way to kind of combat some of this. Also pointing out that the Eastern PA CoC has a non-discrimination and inclusion policy. They have one for the CoC level and then also one at the organization level, which gives tons of great best practices and in some cases guidelines that need to be followed. But in terms of kind of upping an organization's cultural humility. And cultural humility means to be respectful and responsive to the health beliefs and practices and cultural and linguistic needs of diverse population groups. Developing cultural competence or humility is an ongoing dynamic process that takes time and occurs along a continuum. And that said, there is just a really good general reference. If you've seen other modules and you have seen this already, but it is worth sharing again and again because it is very plain language, it is very brief, and it's from HUD and talks about Move On strategies and how to support stable transitions from permanent supportive housing. So well worth the read. It won't take 5 minutes of your time, okay? And then lastly, those of us at DMA are more than happy to answer your questions about this process or offer support. So please reach out via the email address you see on the screen. And thanks so much for watching.